You know that feeling when you're about to dive into a new woodworking project and the biggest question in your head is, do I really need a dedicated sliding table saw? Or can I make do with what I've got? I was in that spot last month, scrolling through endless forums, watching videos, and trying not to waste money on something that would end up gathering dust. If you're on the fence like I was, the link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've been tinkering in my garage for over a decade, and the first thing I look at when a new tool shows up is how it fits into the workflow I already have. The Shopfox W1811 is a 10-inch, 5 HP sliding table saw that promises a blend of power and precision without the footprint of a full-size cabinet saw. That sounds great on paper, but the real test is whether it actually saves you time and frustration when you're cutting a sheet of plywood for a cabinet or ripping a batch of hardwood for a dining table. Let's start with the setup. Unboxing the W1811 feels surprisingly straightforward. The base arrives pre-assembled, and the sliding table folds out of the frame like a well-designed piece of furniture. You'll need a sturdy workbench or a dedicated stand, but the whole unit sits comfortably on a 4 by 6 foot surface. The real advantage here is the extension wings on the table, which push the usable surface out to about 36 inches. That extra room lets you support longer pieces without constantly readjusting the fence, something I've found invaluable when handling 48 sheets. Power-wise, the 5 HP motor is more than enough for most residential projects. I've run it through thick maple and soft pine without the blade stalling, and the torque holds steady even when I'm making deep crosscuts. The sliding mechanism is smooth and doesn't require a lot of force to move the carriage. This matters when you're making a series of repeated cuts and you don't want to fatigue your arm. The 10-inch blade gives you a decent cutting depth, and the max dado width lets you create wide grooves for things like tongue-and-groove flooring without needing a separate dado set. Now, who should really consider this saw? If you're a hobbyist who spends a good chunk of time on cabinets, doors, or any project that requires precise crosscuts and dados, the sliding table saw is a time saver. The ability to lock the table in place and slide the workpiece under a stationary blade means you get cleaner cuts and less chance of kickback. It's also a solid step up for anyone who's outgrown a basic table saw but isn't ready to invest in a full-size industrial unit. On the flip side, if you only do occasional straight cuts on small stock, a standard bench saw will probably do the job for less money and less floor space. One hidden trade-off that shows up after a few weeks of use is the dust collection. The W1811 has a port, but it's not as generous as some larger saws. I hooked it up to a shop vac, and it works, but the system can get a bit clogged when you're cutting MDF or particle board. If you're working in a tight garage where dust is already a problem, you might need to budget for an upgraded collector or a separate filtration system. Another practical point is the crosscut fence. It's sturdy and locks down firmly, which is great for repeatable cuts, but the fence doesn't have the fine adjustment knobs you see on higher-end models. You'll end up using a combination of the built-in micrometer and a separate measuring block for the tightest tolerances. That's not a deal-breaker for most DIYers, but if you're after micron-level precision for fine furniture joinery, you might feel the limitation. I also tested the max dado width on a 3-inch groove for a floating shelf installation. The saw handled it without any wobble, and the cut was clean enough that I didn't need to sand down the edges. The sliding action kept the workpiece firmly against the fence the whole time, which is something you lose with a traditional miter saw when you try to cut a wide dado. That's a practical advantage you won't see in the spec sheet reel, on-the-fly confidence that the cut will stay straight. One thing that's easy to overlook is the noise level. The motor is decently insulated, and while it's louder than a handheld circular saw, it's not ear-splitting. I wore my usual shop ear protection and could still hold a conversation with the person next to me. For a garage that doubles as a family space, that's a plus compared to some industrial-grade saws that roar like a motorcycle. From a value perspective, the 4.8-star rating across 62 reviews suggests that most owners are happy with what they got for the price tag. You're paying for a solid motor, a decent table size, and the sliding mechanism features that usually add up to a much higher cost when you buy them separately. The hidden,